Hello, everybody, and to those of you here in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving. I'm coming to you today from my kitchen. As you know, we're in the middle of Season 12, Meanwhile in Mankato, but we're taking a short mid-season Thanksgiving break today. Don't worry, Episode 4 will be back next week. If you don't like waiting, you can always binge the whole show right now with the Spotlight Plus subscription. More info about that at dakotaspotlight.com. But today, as a little gesture of thanks, I've put together something special, a Thanksgiving treat for you. Over 3.5 hours of almost uninterrupted Dakota Spotlight storytelling. This is something you can play while you perhaps soften the onions or let the rosemary and sage fill the kitchen, or toast those breadcrumbs for stuffing, or while you're driving to see family and friends, or maybe you're avoiding all that and doing your own thing. I've put together the entire Season 10, You Killed Chris, into just 2 episodes. I even stripped out the coming up next time transitions, the recaps, the intros, so you can just sink into the story. We'll even have a little turkey basting break halfway through so you can focus on cooking that bird if that's what you're up to today. Season 10 is about the unsolved 1968 murder of Christine Rothschild, a young and beautiful co-ed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a story shaped by the counterculture of the 1960s, student protests, and a shifting America, with throwback soundscaping woven throughout. It's also a story about the enduring devotion of one friend determined to uncover what happened to Christine. So again, as a special thank you on this Thanksgiving, let's get cooking with a mostly uninterrupted Season 10 of Dakota Spotlight. Let's begin with a brief overview of Christine's murder, starting with the morning she was killed, Sunday, May 26, 1968, 7 weeks after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and just 10 days before Robert Kennedy would be gunned down in cold blood. I'll enlist briefly the help of 2 people I've interviewed. We'll be hearing from them later as we look much closer at the details of this day, but for now, here is a high-level look at Christine's murder.
So it was a Sunday morning, and it was just a cloudy, kind of gloomy day around Madison.
This is Kevin Damask. Kevin wrote a book titled Cold, The Unsolved Murders of 7 Young Women. One of the chapters in his book focuses on Christine Rothschild's murder.
Pretty much overcast, drizzly day, a cool day for late May. It was, towards the end of May.
And this is Sarah Surratt, who was a sophomore at the university that year.
And I used to see her all the time, and I can remember admiring her and thinking how beautiful she was.
Sarah lived in the same residence hall as Christine Rothschild, a private dorm named Anne Emery Hall.
I lived on the same floor as Christine. She lived a few doors down from me. She was tall and thin and had long, straight blonde hair, and she looked like one of those teen models. And apparently she was in high school. She did model.
On the morning she was murdered, Christine woke up at 4 a.m. in her private dorm room. She walked to the communal bathrooms, showered, and then prepared for her morning walk.
She was always up really early walking, and I remember some girls talking about the fact that she took these walks because she had so much pain in her stomach, with her gut, because she had colitis. I remember people talking about that.
Author Kevin Damask again.
Even though it was a Sunday morning when a lot of college kids would stay in, she got up early and did her usual routine, just got up in a residence hall.
Only one person saw Christine before she left Anne Emery Hall that morning. Christine was walking in the hallway on her way to the showers when a house mother or night hostess named Gertrude Armstrong passed her. Like on any other morning, the two exchanged a quick hello.
Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary when she got up, just went about her day and went on her walk.
Christine then left the dorm building, walking out into the twilight of morning. She was bundled up in her twill coat and black knee-high boots. She had gloves with her and carried a black umbrella. Stuffed in her pocket were her cigarettes, a lighter, a room key, and money for coffee. Her body was found in the late afternoon by a 23-year-old maintenance worker named Philip, who had arrived at a building named Sterling Hall, located directly across the street from the hospital. The entrance to the large brick building was at the top of a stone or concrete stairway.
He was going to just go right into the building while the doors were locked, Sunday night. And so in order to get his friend's attention, he's like, well, I'll just go by this window here that's by this thicket of bushes and pound on the window. My buddy will see me. I say, hey, go to the front door, let me in.
So Philip walked into the bushes on the right side of the stairs and headed towards the basement window. It was then and there that he discovered the body of Christine Rothschild. Christine had been stabbed 14 times.
Very gruesome, and they believe that she was also partially strangled too with the lining of her coat that was ripped out during the attack and had strangled her. And they stuffed her gloves down her throat. Through the autopsy, had found out that she had taken a direct blow to the face.
In fact, both of her jaws were broken. The autopsy also showed that Christine had not been sexually assaulted. What seemed less certain was exactly when or where she died.
I always kind of wondered if she was trying to escape her killer and trying to get into the building, maybe, and why she was, or maybe the killer had kind of moved her body and was placed it there. It's a speculation, too, on when exactly she was murdered, because it could have happened earlier in the morning when it was still kind of dark out. Maybe people didn't see as much as far as witnesses. But then there's some speculation that it was maybe later in the morning, maybe like 9 or 10 o'clock.
The police found Christine's umbrella next to her body and also another curious item. It has been described as an expensive men's handkerchief. The handkerchief had been neatly folded and laid out on the ledge of a basement window. Christine's head was resting on top of the handkerchief. It seemed that she had been placed in that position.
Initially, there was, I think, a lot of people that the local police speculated on, a lot of students that they interviewed.
Here is Sarah Zoerb again.
The police questioned everybody at the dorm. And I remember we were at the dorm when they questioned us. We went in a room off of the lobby, I believe, one at a time. And they asked us questions like if she was dating anybody, if we knew who she was dating. And honestly, I didn't know anything about that.
This strange-looking creature gave Wisconsin its nickname, the Badger State. And this badger resides at the Milwaukee Zoo, but his kinfolk may be found in forests such as this. 50% of Wisconsin is natural woodland, making it ideal vacation country for anyone who loves the out-of-doors. But the woods and lakes are only part of the story of this beautiful state. In the city of Racine...
Before we transport ourselves back in time to explore Christine Rothschild's life and death, before we meet her amazing friend Linda and others who were there at the time, let's get a quick understanding of the location where this all took place, in south central Wisconsin, on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
The state capital is Madison, a beautiful small city with Lake Mendota on the north and Lake Monona to the south. Milwaukee, however, is Wisconsin's major city with a population of over 6...
If you're not quite sure where the city of Madison lies, imagine this. You're sitting in your parked car at the state capitol building in the center of Madison, and you're itching to take a road trip. Well, you have some options. Perhaps you'd like to drive 2.5 hours southeast to the big city of Chicago, 150 miles away. Looking for a longer drive? Why not cruise 270 miles in the opposite direction northwest to Minneapolis, Minnesota? Looking for a shorter day trip? Just 80 miles due east of Madison is the big city of Milwaukee on the shores of that gigantic body of water, Lake Michigan. But if it's a lake you're looking for, you don't need to start your car at all. Just a 10-minute stroll away from the Capitol, there are 2 lakes to discover, each in a different direction. The Capitol building and the nearby university campus are both centered on an isthmus, a narrow strip of land between water, with Lake Mendota to the north and Lake Monona to the south. At its most narrow point, this strip of land between the waters measures just 0.7 miles or 1 kilometer across. But if a lake isn't what you're looking for, perhaps you'd like to take a different 10-minute walk and head west to explore the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which, by the way, is commonly referred to as the UW. To get to the UW, you will do what people there have done for over 150 years. You'll walk east on State Street. Along State Street, you are first met with the sights, sounds, and aromas of a vibrant social scene. Restaurants, bars, boutiques, and coffee shops, all bustling with students, faculty, and state employees and visitors. Once beyond this bubbly pocket of activity, you're approaching the campus, true Christine Rothschild country, her old stomping grounds back in 1967 and 1968. First, on your right, is Memorial Library and the Outdoor Library Mall. As you'll soon hear, Christine spent a lot of time in that library. In fact, it was here, in this library, that Christine first began to feel increasingly concerned about a somewhat bothersome and persistent older man. You continue on your walk when State Street suddenly just ends at the bottom of a historic quad named Bascom Hill. As you stroll up the modest incline of Bascom Hill, you'll marvel at the mature trees and the green lawns crisscrossed with walking paths, bustling with students moving between classes. It was here, somewhere, in the days leading up to her murder, that Christine Rothschild stopped to speak with two university police officers. Perched at the top of Bascom Hill is one of the university's oldest and most iconic buildings, Bascom Hall. With 6 white columns, tall windows, and a grand entrance, Bascom Hall stands there somewhat majestically, a statue of Abraham Lincoln sitting before it. You are now at the heart of the campus, a historical spot rich in tradition. The mascot of UW is a badger, and the school's primary colors are red and white. The red color is called Badger Red. The school's fight song is called On Wisconsin.
On Wisconsin, run right through that line. Run the ball clear round, Chicago touchdown, sure this time, you rock, rock. On Wisconsin, fight on for her fame. Fight, fellows, fight, 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 we'll win this game.
You continue on now past the north side of Bascom Hall and walk Observatory Drive, where you discover what was Christine Rothschild's favorite spot on campus, the iconic 85-foot-tall Carillon Bell Tower. To circle back to your car, you head northeast along the northern flank of the campus. There you discover another bustling meeting place, the century-old Memorial Union, with its view of Lake Mendota and the opposing shore some 4 miles away. On another bustling sidewalk along Langdon Street, you pass the library again, and then suddenly you find yourself standing and looking up at a European-looking 5-story brick building. The address is 265 Langdon Street. Today it is an apartment building, but when Christine Rothschild lived here, it was a private dorm residence named Anne Emery Hall. Anne Emery was opened in 1930 and quickly became one of the largest and most popular independent private women's dorms on campus. With its ivy-covered brick walls and elaborate stone carvings of knights and rosettes decorating the vaulted wooden doorway, Christine Rothschild's last home feels more European and medieval than 20th century American. Christine first arrived at this spot in September of 1967. She left it for the last time on the early morning of May 26, 1968. During the short 8 months that she was here, it's hard to know exactly how she felt and exactly what she thought as she slept in Anne Emery or while roaming the UW campus. But thankfully, we do know quite a lot. We know what Christine shared with her friend, Linda Schulko. In fact, if it wasn't for Linda, this story would have likely gone lost and mostly forgotten forever. So let's go back to the fall of 1967, when Linda and Christine were freshmen at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It was here that Linda first met Christine, or Chris as she was called.
The story at Wisconsin starts with new students who come to the campus in the fall. Some from the farm, some from small Wisconsin towns, leaving home for the first time. Some from large cities. Some are freshmen, some graduate students.
I started college in the fall semester of 1967, and UW-Madison had always been my goal because during high school I had attended a new library, a student library association organization there, and I had spent a week there on campus during my senior year.
Different ages, different background. Each year a new community is formed, a brand new little city. Students need a place to live and to eat. They wonder who their friends will be. Everything is strange.
I came from a small Catholic girls' academy, which was very conservative, And when I arrived in Madison, it was just actually the antithesis of anything I'd ever seen or known in life. I was totally inappropriate dressed because I had matching outfits and everything. And consequently, I stood out very sorely from the very first moment I arrived and was aware of it. I lived on the second floor of Whitty Hall off on Johnson Street. And the dorm had 1,000 females in the dorm, which was huge to me, having come from a school of 800. I really did not make friends quickly there. I was just very solitary, and I would eat my meals alone. I think that I spent most of my days just walking around the campus, just trying to acclimate myself to where I was so I wouldn't get lost, because I had only been on the campus one time prior to that. Between the campus to the Capitol, it seemed like there were a million bars, one small bar after another. It stunk. It smelled like, beer. And it's as if everybody was there. And it just seemed so abnormal to me because that atmosphere was so different for me. I was just astounded by the noise and the activities going on at the library mall area and the shops and everything. It was just totally inconceivable to me that people lived this free. It was all very astounding to me.
Linda was not in any way alone in her astonishment of what was going on around her. Coming into that fall semester, the whole nation had witnessed a summer like no other. The summer of 1967 is known by two different names, the Summer of Love and the Long, Hot Summer of 1967. Two names representing two drastically different aspects of American society and cultural dynamics at the time. The Summer of Love was a West Coast term where in San Francisco, thousands of young people joined the hippie movement for a cultural revolution of peace, love, freedom, and experimentation. The Summer of Love was psychedelics and communal living in opposition to the Vietnam War. The Summer of Love was Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. The other name for this summer, the Long, Hot Summer of 1967, was about something different. Intense civil unrest, racial tensions, and violence, mostly affecting African American communities. There were over 150 riots that summer in response to systematic inequalities, discrimination, poverty, high unemployment, and police brutality. At least 85 people died, more than 2,000 were injured, and about 11,000 people were arrested. What Linda was witnessing on the UW campus and along State Street during that first week of college smacked of the Summer of Love, free-spirited stuff, the counterculture. But the other side of that summer, the long, hot summer of 1967, that was not far away. Back in June of 67, there were riots in Atlanta, Boston, Cincinnati, and Tampa. In July, riots in Birmingham, Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, Newark, New Britain, New York City, Plainsfield, Rochester, Toledo, and also just down the road from Madison in Milwaukee. The most destructive riots were in Newark, New Jersey, and in Detroit, Michigan, where 43 people lost their lives.
American warplanes have expanded the air war over North Vietnam with the bombing of 5 previously untouched targets near the heart of the port city of Haiphong. U.S. bombers also zeroed in on a radar site near the Kien An MiG base, 8 miles south of the port city.
We're fighting one war now in Vietnam, and we're losing, as it is. So, why should we come back here and fight a war among ourselves?
Law and order have broken down in Detroit, Michigan. Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights.
In Hot Springs, Arkansas, a critic of the administration's Vietnam policies, J. William Fulbright, hurled a charge at Secretary of State Dean Rusk. The Arkansas Democrat accused Rusk of carrying on a McCarthy-type crusade against people opposing the Vietnam War.
Lyndon Johnson! Lyndon Johnson! Working, who is he working for? He's not working for the people of this country. Lyndon Johnson is working for big business. U.S. big business. That's... Keep moving. Man.
The new 1967 Dodge Coronet. Everything you want in 67 is right here. It's under here, where you can get up to 383 cubic inches of muscle. Out here, where the beauty is something you can't escape. It's in here, where the room and luxury leave other cars taking a back seat. New Dodge Coronet, the low-priced getaway car of 1967.
I introduced myself to the libraries, of course, because I felt a responsibility to stick with my academic. That's the only reason that I was allowed to go to college, is to get my degree, nothing else. I liked Madison, and I knew that it was a great educational place, and I was anxious for classes to start. But my initial impression of the campus was like, I don't think I'm going to have a lot of interaction with a great part of what goes on here.
Confusion, anticipation, excitement. They're all a part of the life of a beginning student at the University of Wisconsin. At the annual New Student Picnic, held on the western edge of the campus, food for the body is just as important as the food for thought that will be a continuing source of intellectual nourishment for these students during their stay at the university. Getting acquainted and just plain knowing where to go is essential to getting off on the right foot. Because once the school year is underway, there are precious few chances for a breather. The pace is fast and demanding.
About a week and a half before classes began, the Letters in Science Honors Program made appointments for everyone to come and speak with Dean Rudicelli privately to work out our courses for the first semester. He had a very small office on the first floor of South Hall, which was right next to Bascom Hall, which was the main building on the hill of UW. And we were sitting in there, and everybody was trying to look quiet, sophisticated, and private. And that's how I met Chris. She was wearing like a blue shift with white tights and white shoes, loafers, dressed too well for all of us. But she had no arrogance or presence to her, as far as like, well, we're in a different class here or something. One of the guys knocked over a huge rack of brochures, and I mean, it just, in this tiny room, it was everywhere. And right away, Chris got up. There were about 9 of us, 10 of us in the room perhaps, and Chris got up right away and was on her hands and knees picking things up. And what I noticed about her right away is the guy was really embarrassed, and she whispered something in his ear, and he smiled, and then he kept on picking up the things on the floor with the rest of us and sat back down. But I was always kind of like, I wonder what she said to him, because he seemed so calm and relaxed afterwards. So when we got done picking up all this stuff that was accumulated on the floor, I took the seat right next to her. And we sat there for a few minutes, and I finally said what my name was, and she introduced herself. And it was kind of a short conversation, and she said she was from Chicago. And I asked her where she lived, and she told me, and we exchanged that kind of information. And that was really about it at that moment. I didn't see her again until maybe 3 or 4 days later, when I was passing the Carillon Tower, which was the side of Bascom Hill by the Commerce Building, and she was sitting there just having a cigarette, and I sat down and spoke with her then, and that's when we really started talking more. After that, we just became friends. She was probably the opposite of me when I met her. She was very well dressed. I remember that very vividly. It took a while for me to feel comfortable with the fact that attire-wise, she was smoking and so forth, which I had never done in my life. It was just so different for me, and so I was so unaccustomed to being around people like this that I was a little hesitant at first to even befriend her. But after a few times of meeting her randomly on the hill and so forth, that'll disappear, of course.
Christine Rothschild grew up in North Chicago. She was the second oldest of 4 children, all girls. The family lived in a prosperous community named Edgewater in a plush 2-story, 15-room home. Her father was an inventor and successful businessman. His daughters never needed to apply for scholarships or be too concerned about money. His daughters grew up in an environment intended to stimulate learning and creativity, surrounded by books, music, and art. Christine and her sisters were well-groomed and well-coached in a home where appearances mattered. Christine attended a huge high school in Chicago named Nicholas Senn High School. Christine excelled at Senn High, ranking 4th in a class of 500. She was also a teen model around Chicago, and her older sister a clothing designer. Christine had aspirations of becoming a journalist, and from what Linda recalls about her personality, she probably would have made a really great one.
She was very quiet, more the listener than the talker, but she was always listening. It's not like she was tuned out or, her mind was in a different direction. She was just very tuned into when people talked. And when you would be talking, like if I'd be talking or complaining or whatever about class or anything, whatever, she would think before she would open her mouth and say something. She would go, well, how did that happen? Or she'd try to get the whole perspective on the situation. She was very pensive in a way about things. She didn't just blurt things out like I did. I also found that she was not real animated. She would sit quietly and composed, whereas, I would get louder perhaps, or I'd start gesturing or whatever, and she would just be watching, and sometimes she'd say, you seem a bit agitated there, Linda, that kind of thing. And it would be like I would start laughing, and so would she, but she didn't gesture a lot, and I would say that she more or less was introspective on things, as far as she would like analyze things and get things into perspective in her mind before she'd open her mouth or comment or say anything. And when she would complain, she didn't go on and on like I would. She would be very succinct. And if you weren't really tuned into Chris, you could sometimes not catch that she was really upset or happy or whatever about something, because it wasn't expressed in a long, drawn-out conversation. She was just a kind of a controlled personality.
Go, go, go with Spinner Top. Spinner Top here, Spinner Top there, Spinner Top everywhere. It's the thing to wear. Keeps your brain warm, gives your ears the air. And when you go, 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 it's more fun than hair. Everything's more fun with Spinner Top. Spinner Top here, Spinner Top there, Spinner Tops everywhere. It's the thing to wear. Keeps your brain warm, gives your ears the air. And when you go, 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 it's more fun than...
She was a huge coffee drinker, and she always was smoking. She smoked something I had never heard of, which were lettuce cigarettes. And I think that might be one of the reasons why, even though she was a big smoker, she never had that, what I call the smoker stench to her. Smoked lettuce cigarettes, which was strange to me, and she explained that she had to buy them in particular stores because they weren't that widespread. We used to meet in between classes because she loved to have a cigarette break with coffee. And I didn't drink coffee. I'd always have a shake, a sundae, a burger, chips, whatever. And we would meet then or after classes before dinner. We would meet for an hour or so and sit by the Carillon Tower or go into one of the study areas in the hallway in one of the in one of the buildings, especially Van Heist, because we both took language there. We just started spending more and more time, and then she would come visit at the dorm. We studied so many hours per day, and we were in classes so many hours. We had an overload, both of us, that there was very little recreational time. We just didn't have the social time that most people had, even on weekends.
As the fall semester of 1967 moved along for Linda and Christine, the nation's counterculture vicariously experienced a setback when the much idolized revolutionary leader Che Guevara was killed. His death became a symbol for the ultimate sacrifice for revolutionary ideals. And not far from Madison, in Milwaukee, it wasn't a hippie or a Marxist guerrilla at the forefront of demonstrations and protests, but actually a Catholic priest, Father James Groppe, who led marches for equal rights and equal housing.
The controversy continues. Is the revolutionary leader, Ernesto Che Guevara, really dead? The Bolivian army says yes, and that his body has been cremated. But Guevara's brother, Roberto, has just returned from Bolivia, and he says the guerrilla killed by the Bolivian army was not his brother.
We are very concerned about the attitude and the conduct of the mayor of the city of Milwaukee. Everyone built him up as such a great hero when there was this little disturbance on 3rd Street because he called in the National Guard immediately and put the entire city under a curfew. Well, for heaven's sake, we have a right to exercise our constitutional God-given right of free speech. Now, for heaven's sake, he had a white riot on the South Side for the last 2 nights, and what did he call for? A voluntary curfew. He didn't have any voluntary curfew when a few blacks tore up part of 3rd Street. That's what we can. That's a double standard of justice.
Well, Father, has your marches to the South Side accomplished anything so far for fair housing?
We're going to get fair housing, not only for the city of Milwaukee, but we're going to get it on a national scene. And it's going to be this consistent type of courageous protest that's going to bring about fair housing legislation. Frederick Douglass talked about this 100 years ago. He said, no one ever got their rights given to them on a platter. You've got to fight for it. You've got to struggle for it. And that's what we're doing. We're protesting.
Hi-ho, hey, hey, to Wrigley Spearmint Gum. Work goes faster, smoother too. Life seems brighter when you chew. Hi-ho, hey, hey, to Wrigley Spearmint Gum.
She was a very private person. I knew nothing about, we never talked about high school. She went to Senn High School, which was a huge high school. She was like all-class president one time and vice president of her class at another time. And she was very active in the newspaper and also in like student aid assistance for helping students study and so forth. But she never talked about any of this. She never said how how her class rank was even like 4 out of 500, which to me was something that I think I would have made it known more often than never, you know, in the right circumstances. But none of this would ever be disclosed because she never really focused on herself as far as saying, well, you did this, but in my class we did that, or man, yours was small, but mine was huge, or, you know, nothing. And she never talked very much. Like I'd ask her if she ever went to prom and that, because I never did. She never mentioned like prom or big occasions or things that she attended or participated in that were very important to the campus and to the legend of people really knowing her. I always wanted to go, like there was Paisano's Pizza Parlor there on State Street and over on University. And she would always be glad to come along. That was never an issue, but she never ate. At first I thought, well, maybe she's just being super polite and maybe my taste in food is not the same as hers or whatever. But then I realized very quickly she had an eating disorder. I didn't have a name for it or anything at that point, but I could see that while I'm stuffing my face with pizza or a hot dog over at, one of the places or a bratwurst, she would be having a cup of coffee.
So if you want your own soda fountain now, go to the store and get Great Shakes. What's the name of it? Great Shakes. Great Shakes.
Linda has made it her life's quest to uncover the truth behind her friend's murder. Over the years, Linda has tirelessly questioned, researched, and investigated this case. She has conducted interviews with Christine's family and friends, law enforcement officials, university staff, and others. We will hear from Linda again shortly, but first, here is Sarah again, one of Christine's dorm mates at Anne Emery Hall. Sarah remembers life at the beautiful 5-story dorm building on Langdon Street.
I really did love it. I felt like I belonged there. It was like a cozy place to live because it was an older building with all the charm.
Both Sarah and Christine lived on the first floor. They both had single private rooms. Sarah's window looked out the front of the building towards Langdon Street.
And Christine lived on that floor also, but down the hall. So you would have walked in, you would have turned left, and my room was on the front, and then you go down the hall, and Christine's room, I believe, was like in the middle of the hall, down that hall, facing east, which would have kind of faced the Capitol building.
While the showers and bathrooms were communal, the simple single rooms had the basic necessities a college student might need.
It had a chest of drawers that was built in, and then there was a mirror that was built in, and there was a bed, a closet, and the windows were pretty big, and because it was an older building, they were windows you could open. Because we were on the first floor, it's possible that somebody on the outside could come up to the window and look in or talk to you from the window.
Despite those free-spirited times, these young adult women at Anne Emery Hall were not exactly free. They couldn't just come and go as they pleased. They had a curfew. That's right, they were expected to be home by a certain time, including on weekends. Of course, there were ways around that.
I remember I was dating some young man, and when I wanted to stay out later than whatever the curfew was, I would spend the night at my brother's house, who lived in Shorewood Hills, if I wanted to stay out later than the curfew.
And speaking of curfews and dating, Christine Rothschild went on some dates too during her time there, but she never had a boyfriend. Her friend Linda recalls.
She had to know she was very pretty. She had to know that. There was no doubt about it. I mean, she had beautiful skin. She was blonde. She wore her hair in a flip. She had gorgeous clothing. Her sister had sewn everything, and her sister was in the School of Design in Chicago. She never was conscious of this. She was just focused on going where she was going, having her cigarette, smiling if somebody said hi, and letting it go. In fact, when she used to date, it wasn't these like, let's go here, there, and everywhere, and then have a few drinks, and then I'll walk you back to your dorm. You know, it'd be like she'd always focus on something like going to a show or going to some kind of exhibit or to some kind of thing that was going on campus where they'd have a live performance where you had to buy tickets in advance. And oftentimes she would even purchase the tickets and just invite somebody. And I always said to her, you know, I said, how do you get these guys off of you at the end of the night? And thinking, well, you know, maybe we could go one step further because it was a very liberal campus. And she says, I give everybody a kiss on the cheek or a kiss on the forehead and I say goodnight. And I know that for a fact because I've talked to some of the guys she dated. And they were like, you know, swooning for her almost. And not because she was pretty necessarily. She was kind and good-natured and sweet and genuine. And I think that they saw something special in her beyond, many people did beyond her looks. And, but she was not going to get involved with anybody. And, she had no real intentions of staying at Madison that long either.
In fact, Christine never had any intention of attending the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the first place. According to Linda, it was Christine's mother who had insisted on UW. Perhaps this is why Christine almost seemed to resent her life and surroundings there in Madison.
It was ironic because she lived right on the very edge of Langdon Street. And after leaving her dorm, it's probably all different now, but it used to be all sorority and fraternity, like old mansions that were converted over to these fraternities and sororities. And it went on for, I'm going to say, a few blocks. And she was right on the edge of all of that. And she was in a top dollar dorm. I mean, Ann Emory was private dorm and it was very expensive. She really hated the sorority and fraternity activity that she would see. She hated literally State Street with the drinking and all of the activities on campus that would say like free beer and everything, or, you know, come and this and that. And people, you know, were smoking joints all over. I mean, it was all around us. We were in that environment, and she didn't really identify with very much there, except I think the quality of her courses and the beauty of the campus.
Linda, on the other hand, loved UW. She felt it was the big academic institute that she needed and wanted and had strived and worked so hard for all through grade school and high school. Linda recalls that on this topic, Christine would respectfully disagree with her.
You know, I tell her, you know, I love this campus. I'd say, you know, I love the old buildings. I love, you know, that there's so much faculty. I'm not crazy about all the students, but the course selections and all that were just phenomenal for me. And she agreed, but she would always tell me, she said, I really hate UW. She said, I'm not trying to burst your bubble, but she said, I really hate UW. She said, I never wanted to be here. And she said, my goal is really, I've always wanted to go to Vassar. And she says, I know we have a good journalism program here and I'm going to make the best of it, but not my end point is what it came down to.
Linda explains that while Christine's mother ran a pretty tight ship in the home, her father had a different nature about him.
I think it was like a shoulder to cry on and to share her secrets with and so forth. And her thoughts and her dreams. I think that's more or less. Her mother was more of a social highlight person, where you were proper and you were in the right society and you looked the right way and you knew the right people and you did the right things and you had the right opportunities. And the combination is good. I mean, I can't say that that's a bad combination. You know, it's got its benefits, but I don't think her mother really understood her. Chris wanted to be independent. She wanted to go to a school, not because of its name or whatever. She wanted to go where she thought the quality of education was best for her future career and her life. She really wanted to go to Vassar for several years before she even started college. But her mother wouldn't let her go because she wanted her daughter close to home. Her mother wanted her within an easy return distance of Chicago. And the friction built quickly after Chris came to Madison.
During that fall of 1967, as the tension between Christine and her mother escalated, with her mother insisting that she remain at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a different kind of pressure was mounting across the country. And this national tension was evident right there in Christine's own backyard, too, on the UW campus. Nationwide, universities had been hotbeds of demonstrations protesting the United States' involvement in Vietnam. And up until October of 1967, and very much in contrast to the many civil rights protests and riots that previous summer, these campus gatherings had remained peaceful and void of violence. However, this calm was on the brink of disruption. The whole situation was poised for a catalyst, and on October 18th that year, that catalyst emerged at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it all started with something that at first glance sounds harmless enough, when an organization came to Madison to recruit graduates to come and work for them. No, this organization was not the Army or Navy or Marines or Air Force. It wasn't the FBI or the CIA either. Nothing like that. It was a company named Dow Chemical. What occurred on the UW campus on that now infamous day has since been dubbed Dow Day.
I knew very few people who had anything positive to say about the war.
This is Jane Maydell. In October of 1967, she was a graduate student working towards her PhD at UW.
In Madison at the time, the Dow Chemical Company used to come to the campus to recruit people who were graduating to come work at the Dow Chemical plant. And Dow Chemical was making napalm. And napalm was being dropped in bombs by the United States into Vietnam and setting fire to the trees and the greenways and everything, all the things in North Vietnam. And people were getting caught in the fire. And people were getting burned and dying because we were dropping fire bombs. And a lot of people on the campus were very angry about Dow Chemical coming to recruit on campus.
And so many students, including Jane, expressed their opposition to the university being in any way associated with Dow Chemical.
We tried to talk to the dean of students, and while he was willing to listen to us, the university was not willing to prohibit Dow Chemical Company from coming.
And so the students decided to do something about it.
We took over the first floor of the administration building and were not letting anybody come in. The police came in with batons and they pushed people out of the building. There were a lot of people who were injured. And, everybody was hanging out at the back of the building. The police were arresting anybody who they thought was a leader. This shows you how unexperienced we were when we did this thing. We moved some tables to the back door so the police couldn't get in the back door. And then the police come in the front door and they start swinging their clubs and we can't get out the back door. So people were climbing over the table and under the table and the police is just swinging. And, needless to say, there was a lot of people with bloody heads. I mean, they didn't even swing at bodies. They were swinging at heads. I mean, we saw people getting their heads bashed.
Linda Schulkel remembers Dow Day as well.
I was walking from one of the small libraries in one of the rooms back to my dorm, and I was oblivious at initially what was going on as to why. And I had never seen anything so catastrophic or dramatic in my life. I mean, thousands of students all there screaming and yelling and throwing things and chanting and so forth. And I went straight back to my dorm, and it was brutal. But Chris and I never, and we talked about it later because we weren't together that particular day or anything, but neither one of us ever participated in anything related to demonstrations because I don't think it was our nature. And secondly, I think that we weren't followers. We didn't like, well, if the crowd is doing it, let's just join in. So unless it had been a private issue of something we'd want to address to somebody personally, I don't think we had the right personalities, perhaps, to be part of that kind of a gathering.
Knowing that Christine Rothschild had never wanted to attend UW in the first place, and considering her general dissatisfaction with her life there, it's easy to imagine that Christine may have been feeling more frustrated than ever with the sudden outbreak of violence on her campus. But the opposition to the war and the violence around her wouldn't stay in Madison. Dow Day was a spark that would ignite and quickly spread across the nation. The opposition to the war wasn't just going to fade away now. It was real and it was here to stay, or as stated here in this PBS documentary film titled 2 Days in October.
Now, in the next 3, 4, or 5 months, once you hit 68, everything is going to pop. But I think Wisconsin is the first, and Dow was the bell.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
Oakland, California, where demonstrators against the Vietnam War tried to close the Army Induction Center. 91 were arrested when some of them tried to block the entrances. Some 240 people were jailed within 4 days of demonstrations in a week of nationwide protests, which ended with a giant rally in Washington. Police moved in quickly to carry off the sit-down protesters. President Johnson denounced the irresponsible acts of violence and declared that American policy in Vietnam would not be changed. Resistance to America's war policy has been growing for some time, but it is only recently that the voices of protest have risen to the surface.
More than 7,000 anti-Vietnam War demonstrators parade near the Los Angeles hotel where President Johnson attends a Democratic fundraising dinner between summit talks with Premier Kosygin.
Afternoon, November 20th, on the San Jose State College campus. What you're watching is the result of a demonstration that began about an hour ago. The Professors Against the War and the Students for Democratic Society had marched in front of the administration building to protest the recruitment on this campus by Dow Chemical Company of employees. The protest was based upon the fact that Dow makes napalm, which is used in warfare in Vietnam.
Rain, humidity, moisture. They're the troublemakers that can take a hairstyle down. But here's how to hold a hairstyle up. White Rain Hairspray. Why, it holds even in the rain. As if there were little umbrellas in the spray. It's that moisture-proof. White Rain holds and holds and holds. White Rain Hairspray holds even in the rain.
As the year 1967 came to an end, things were much the same for Christine and for Linda. Christmas came, and then the new year arrived, 1968. Around the nation, more protests, more Civil War marches, and rising opposition to the U.S. involvement in the war in Vietnam. By late February, even the highly respected news anchor Walter Cronkite concluded publicly that he didn't believe the war could be won.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
Then came the spring of '68. The days leading up to Christine's murder were laced with tragedy. In early April, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Robert Kennedy, who would himself be assassinated 2 months later, announced the news of King's death to a crowd during a campaign stop for his presidential bid.
Very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in.
Linda remembers very clearly the last time she saw her friend Christine. It was a week before finals, 4 days before the murder. It was a Wednesday, and Linda was standing on the sidewalk at Bascom Hall, and Chris was walking up the hill towards her. Linda called out to Chris to get her attention.
She didn't hear it at first, and I yelled her name again, and Chris looked up and smiled and just kind of like gave me the hand like, hi, and I'm on my way up. I saw her then, and I told her, I said, I know we're busy this week, but how about if we just take like a 2 or 3 hour break on Saturday and go to the swim meet? I said, because I still have a load of papers and studying and cramming to do for my exams next week. And I knew she did. And I said, I'm going insane. I got to have something going on. And she said, sounds good to me.
Linda and Chris made arrangements. Linda would call Chris Friday evening and give Chris the exact time of the swim meet, and they would plan their Saturday from there.
She said, fine, I'll see you then. She went to her class and I went to mine, and that was it.
But Linda would not see Christine that weekend. Linda decided to do something different.
Friday morning, I still can't figure this out in my own mind. I decided to go home to work on my term paper that was not even researched at that point, which was a really stupid idea because I came from a home where there were 5 of us living on the first floor. It was 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. So there was no privacy for studying. So the only place I could really work on my term paper was at the kitchen table, where, of course, everybody had to eat. So every time there was a meal, I had to take everything off, put everything back. And I can't understand why I even decided to go home when I had a private dorm room. I had taken my typewriter with me, my research books, everything. I mean, I had a load.
Linda was unable to get Christine on the phone that morning, but she wanted to let her know that she would have to cancel her plans. It was in the days before email, voicemail, and texting, so before heading to the bus station, she did what we all did back then. She wrote Chris a note on paper.
I pulled out a sheet of paper and I wrote her a quick note, and I jammed it between the door and the edge of the door, and I took off and I went home. From Friday, when I got home about noon, let's say, until after midnight on Sunday night, I was working. I was at that kitchen table sweating because I hated the topic I was writing about, and it had to be so long, and it was just on and on.
Late Sunday night, as Linda was working on her term paper, the phone rang in her parents' home.
I can still picture that green thing ringing today. It was on the wall that separated our kitchen from the wall of my parents' bedroom. And I knew my parents would not tolerate that well. So I grabbed the phone as soon as I heard that first ring. And I remember the first words I heard was, is this Linda Tomaszewski? It was. And I said, yes. And he said that his name was Officer Henderson, I believe, from UW Madison Police Department. And he asked if I knew who Chris was. And I said, yes. And I thought it was a prank. I thought somebody that we knew probably had been out drinking and decided to disturb me, knowing that I was home working diligently while they were out drinking. And so I listened for a second, and he talked, and he asked me when the last time I saw Chris was. And then he asked me, he says, do you know anybody who wanted to date Chris that she didn't want to date? And I still wasn't really in tune with the conversation. And, besides probably saying, yeah, there were a lot of guys, I specifically mentioned somebody that I remembered, one guy who was kind of pesky about Chris. He really, really liked her, but he wasn't harmful in any shape or form. Anyways, and I said his name. And then I made a stupid remark and I still remember that remark, and it's a shameful thing that I can't even figure out why I said it, much less I said, what did somebody do? Spike or punch at the church dance or something? I said something to that effect. And he didn't, of course, comment, but he said he asked me when I would be back on campus, and then that was it. I didn't think twice about it. It was basically some jerk called me. My parents are probably angry because they're laying in bed thinking, who's calling our house at this time of night? And I just was finishing up my papers. I had junk all over. And then I went to bed.
All right, time for a quick turkey-based break. I hope you're enjoying the story. If you've got a bird in the oven, this is your moment to give it some attention. If you're working on stuffing, maybe stir those onions and coax a little sage and thyme into the pan. And if you're working today or keeping things simple or just taking a quiet moment to yourself, this break is for you too. In fact, I'm going to go check my own stuffing situation right now. Whether today is busy, quiet, familiar, or something completely different, I'm grateful you're spending a little of it here with me. And we'll be back to the story in just a moment. On Monday morning, Linda woke up at her parents' house, made final touches on her term paper, and prepared to take the bus back to Madison. She recalls that her father always turned on the radio in the morning.
And the very first words I heard was co-ed. I didn't hear anything before that or after that. Those were the first words. And I thought, that's a strange way to talk about a student. I don't know why that stuck in my head as being strange, but it was, instead of saying like a female student, it was like co-ed. And it just sounded kind of proper and, I don't know, unfamiliar to my jargon.
And then Linda comprehended what was being said on the radio. An 18-year-old co-ed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Miss Christine Rothschild, was found murdered on the UW campus Sunday evening. Shocked, speechless, and disoriented, Linda returned to the UW campus.
That was the whole change in the world. I remember I showered and I changed clothes and I grabbed my paper, and it was like I could feel like I was being bombarded by like sound and light. Everything around me, like the world should be quiet right now. Everybody should be thinking of Chris, or everybody should be mourning or whatever. And as I looked around me, I remember thinking, nobody even cares about Chris. It was like the world kept on. Chris was murdered on Sunday. On Tuesday night was her wake, or the casket is out and people can go to like a funeral home or to a church or whatever and say a prayer. And then the following day is when they usually have like a mass, speakers perhaps, and the burial. I did not go to that on Wednesday, to the sermon or to the cemetery. I went Tuesday night, and I went to the funeral home. It was just a very plain, like stucco room, large room with pews, dark pews, a few, and it had like beams on it, almost European. And the place wasn't that big. And then like 10 feet in front of it was like a little kneeler and a little stand, and the casket was on it.
Before taking a seat at the wake, Linda spoke with Christine's mother briefly. This was a pivotal moment in Linda's life. In many ways, her life's path changed right then and right there.
I sat there, and that's when I promised Chris I was going to figure it all out. I felt that this was a mission that I would undertake because that's what I wanted to do for Chris. And I in my mind, because of what I was hearing, they were already saying how difficult this case was becoming, and no witnesses and no leads and all this stuff. And it was very, very aggravating to me that the world wasn't turned upside down because of Chris. And I figured that in my mind, I guess my ego or my whatever was such that I decided that I can take care of her.
In her book titled Murder on the 56th Day, Linda Schulkel explains that Christine Rothschild's life at the University of Wisconsin-Madison was punctuated in part by routines. For one, Christine woke up very early each morning, earlier than the average college student. Christine apparently had difficulty sleeping each night. Linda suggests this was possibly due to overstimulation from coffee and cigarettes. Or perhaps it was her health that kept her up. She suffered from colitis, which is inflammation of the large intestine. It can cause severe pain, fever, dehydration, and other health issues. So each morning, Christine woke in her first-floor private room at Ann Emery Hall on Langdon Street. After showering in the restroom down the hall, she got dressed, got ready, and then she engaged in the second part of her morning routine, her early morning walk. Her route may have very well varied a little each day. Sometimes she walked along Lake Mendota and other areas on campus where she could get closer to nature. Linda recalls that Christine liked gathering pine cones, acorns, and wildflowers along the way. Linda was never invited on these morning walks with Christine. She believes her friend Chris simply needed time alone and preferred the early mornings before the UW campus would be flooded with students, shattering the peace and quiet on campus. Sometimes Christine would stop for a coffee and a cigarette. One of her destinations was a drugstore named Rennebaum's, known locally as Rennie's. Rennie's was a chain of drugstores, not the pharmacy type of today, more the soda fountain style of yesteryear, with a long counter that served everything from ice cream shakes to grilled cheese sandwiches. Christine frequented two outlets of the Rennie's chain, one on State Street and another at 1357 University Avenue. She was often the very first customer of the morning. At Rennie's, Christine would sit and sip her coffee and smoke her cigarettes. Apparently, she always sat alone. After her coffee and cigarette break, Christine would make another brief stop along her walk. This spot on the UW campus was very near the University Avenue Rennie's drugstore. It was just up the street and around the corner, a spot right outside a building that is now known as the Medical Sciences Building, but back then served as University Hospital. Here is Linda Schulko again.
I knew she met a group of staff. I don't know what positions they had at the hospital, young people that would meet at the emergency entrance there over on Charter Street, on the Charter Street side of University Hospital.
This location, the spot where ambulances would enter and exit the emergency room courtyard, was virtually right across the street from the entrance to Sterling Hall, the location where Christine would be found murdered behind a thicket of bushes next to the front steps.
And I think she became familiar with them because they were smoking, and of course Chris smoked. So, she introduced herself probably at some early point and became friends with this small group, and they kind of met at the same time every morning before shift or whatever it was. And they'd have a cigarette and say hi and talk for a few minutes, and then she'd move on and they'd go back to work.
And Christine, assumingly, would go back to her dorm or the library, or on weekdays, perhaps she went to her morning class.
Escape! Come on over to Royal Crown Cola. It's a mad, 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 mad cola. RC, the one with the mad, mad taste. Better shake that cola drag. Check the one that's really mad. It's a mad, 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 mad cola. RC, the one with the mad, mad taste. RC.
There were no classes that morning on Sunday, May 26th, but of course, Chris had a routine, and so she woke up early as usual. When investigators would later search her dorm room, they would discover the remnants of Christine's last breakfast, a partially eaten can of spinach, perhaps a diet influenced by her condition. On her way to the showers, she passed the person last known to have seen her alive, a house mother, Gertrude Armstrong. Miss Armstrong would tell a news reporter, quote, "She came out of her room, headed for the bathroom in her nightgown. We almost ran into each other." It was a somewhat dreary and cloudy day with expected rain. Christine left Anne Emery Hall wearing a blue miniskirt, knee-high boots, and a 3/4-length tweed coat. She had her gloves with her and carried an umbrella. She took with her her key to her dorm room, her cigarettes, and some money for coffee. And then she left Anne Emery Hall for the last time. That evening, a student and maintenance worker named Philip was heading over to Sterling Hall to see his buddy. Philip scooted up the stone steps in front of Sterling and grabbed the door. Unfortunately, it was locked. But apparently, Philip's friend was working on the ground floor, or possibly the basement floor. So Philip got an idea. He could get his friend's attention through a window. All he had to do was rap on the right one, and his buddy could come and let him in. Moments later, Philip was on the phone with the police. A woman. And blood. Lots of blood. Because the murder took place on the campus, the University of Wisconsin-Madison Police Department owned this case. It had been 10 years since UW had had a murder, and that one had been open and shut. In fact, that murder took place inside Sterling Hall. An argument between two researchers had gotten out of hand. UW's police chief, Ralph Hansen, knew immediately that he would need some assistance on this one. He asked for help from the state crime lab, as well as from Madison City Police and the county sheriff. Madison PD sent over Detective Charles Lulling. From the county sheriff's office, Captain Dick Josephson arrived at the crime scene. An autopsy would later show she had been stabbed 14 times in the breasts, chest, and neck. She had also been strangled with part of the lining of her coat. Apparently, the weapon used could have been similar to a surgeon's scalpel. Robbery did not appear to be the motive. Christine still wore 2 expensive rings, one on each hand. But her gloves were not on those hands. They had instead been shoved down Christine's throat by her killer. Oddly, a handkerchief, which has been described as an expensive man's hanky, was folded neatly and resting under Christine's head. Next to Christine's body, they discovered her umbrella and her plastic case containing her room key. Christine was not carrying any identification, and so for the moment, she was a Jane Doe. The University Hospital was just across the street from Sterling Hall. The body was loaded on a stretcher and taken to the hospital, transferred to a gurney, and then rushed into an empty emergency room. A nurse suggested that they take a look at the labels of the clothing. Maybe that would give them a clue about her identity. The name Christine Rothschild was embroidered on a fancy clothing tag. The first newspaper coverage was the very next afternoon in the local paper, the Capital Times. The story was front page with a headline across the top that read, "Co-ed stabbed 14 times." There were 2 articles, one with the headline, "Police Search for Clues in UW's Slaying," and another article with a photo of Christine and the headline, "Christine, she had a smile for everyone." Also on that front page was a photograph taken from the top steps of Sterling Hall and overlooking the crime scene after Christine's body had been removed. The photographer had been looking down from above and captured 2 Dane County Sheriff's officers with flashlights investigating the scene late into the evening. One of the men in that photograph in 1968 was Dick Josephson.
I think at that time I was probably only a sergeant.
Today, Dick Josephson is 90 years old.
Well, number one, that was 56 years ago. It's a long time ago. Yeah, I remember Christine, and I have always wondered, who for sure actually killed her. I know our department processed that scene, and because it was a major crime as far as UWPD was at the time, our lab technicians processed the scene, yes, for several hours. Probably 8 or 9 hours, probably, I don't know. But they were there a long time.
Back then, in May of 1968, the University Police Department had 63 officers. Because of the timing of the murder, just 1 week before classes would end and students would vacate the campus for summer, much of the UWPD staff had been scheduled to go on leave. Chief Hansen ordered his staff to stay on, and eventually he would promise a month's vacation to any of his staff who could crack this case. From day one, it seemed the case was going to be difficult. There were no witnesses, and it was in the days before security and surveillance cameras could be found in front of every building. Just 2 days into it, law enforcement were already making statements to the media that this might be a tough case to crack. A task force was created, composed of 6 university police officers and 4 detectives from other agencies. The case went cold during the first week.
When you've got a job to do, reach for something good to chew. Chewing helps you stand the pace, anytime and any place. So hi-ho, hey, hey, chew your little troubles away. Hi-ho, hey, hey, chew Wrigley Spearmint Gum. Work goes faster, smoother too. Life seems brighter when you chew. Hi-ho, hey, hey, chew Wrigley Spearmint Gum.
Senator Robert Kennedy has won his first crucial test in the Indiana primary, beating both Senator Eugene McCarthy and favorite son candidate Governor Roger Brannigan. With nearly all of the votes counted, Kennedy leads with 42% of the vote. Brannigan has 31%, McCarthy 27%. Former Vice President Richard Nixon rolled up heavy vote totals as the only person listed on the Republican ballot.
Before we continue, I think we need to stop and think about memory for a second. It will come in very handy and help the pieces of this story fall into place a little more elegantly as we move along. I'd like to ask you to imagine a tragic and fatal event and an array of people associated with it. Witnesses to the event, first responders, reporters, but also friends and loved ones of the deceased. Now imagine you want to tell a story about that event some 50 years later. You have a few sources at your disposal. You have the present-day recollections of witnesses and loved ones of the victim. These sources retell the event to you as they remember it now, 50 years later. You also have records of statements made directly after the event occurred. Perhaps a witness gave a statement to the police, or a family member talked to a reporter the day after their loved one died. On top of that, you have statements made throughout the years. You're hoping to tell the most accurate story possible, but unfortunately, things don't line up 100% of the time. There are discrepancies every which way between these many tellings throughout the years. Which of these accounts are likely to be the most accurate? Statements done the day after an event, those done 25 years later, or your present-day interviews 50 years after the fact? Of course, the answer seems to be incredibly obvious. Certainly, the original statements would be most accurate because memory fades over time. Yet, it is also recognized that we remember important events better than insignificant ones. The more monumental the event, the more we remember them. But studies of human memory have shown that even those memories are not as ironclad as we think. When study participants are asked 3, 5, 10, or 20 years later, their memories have changed. Sometimes shifted just a smidgen, sometimes a lot. Memories can become contaminated by other sources, and it turns out humans are not so good at keeping it all straight. Ever hear yourself say, "I'm not sure if I was there myself or if someone told me this story, but..." When it comes to long-term memory, we just have a hard time keeping our sources straight. It's human nature. So then, the earliest recorded account is the most reliable, right? Well, maybe, but not always. Sometimes the passage of time is actually helpful in getting closer to accuracy. Studies also show you must take into account the emotional state of the individual at the time they were interviewed or questioned. If a family member or loved one is interviewed immediately while in shock or experiencing trauma and overwhelming grief, they may not be able to make much sense of anything. Everything is upside down at the moment. For them, waiting a week, a month, or more can actually be beneficial. Memories can come back and sort themselves out. It's helpful, I think, to keep all of this in mind as we continue on with this story. When Christine Rothschild was murdered, it's certain her family were devastated with grief, but so were Christine's friends, people like Linda Schulkel. When Linda left the UW campus to go home for that summer, only a week had passed since the murder. Linda left Madison in a daze. But something probably happened to her over that summer of 1968. As time progressed, perhaps the level of grief or shock began to wane a little, and her mind managed to sift and sort through everything she had seen and everything she had heard during her relatively short friendship with Christine Rothschild. Something wasn't right. Something needed to be sorted out.
I was riddled with guilt, terrible, terrible guilt, after speaking to Henderson on the phone.
The Henderson that Linda is referring to was the police officer who had called Linda while she was working on her term paper. The cop had asked her if she knew of any co-eds that had pursued Christine romantically. There were many, she knew, but she blurted out the name of a young man who had been perhaps a little more interested than the others.
And I had not the slightest feeling that that man had done anything to hurt Chris.
And then, suddenly, clarity. A memory returned to her. It had taken its sweet time, but once it worked its way to the surface again, Linda was flabbergasted she hadn't seen it all clearly right away. Maybe it was the way Officer Henderson had asked the question in the first place. Maybe it was the shock at the time. Maybe it was both. Yes, there were many co-eds who were interested in Christine, but somehow Linda had, until this moment, blocked out someone else entirely. Not a co-ed, a grown man. A persistent and, in fact, annoying older man. And he had been very interested in Christine.
And I kept thinking about it. I thought, my God, why didn't I mention Niels Jorgensen to that officer?
Niels Jorgensen was a 42-year-old resident surgeon at the University Hospital just across the street from Sterling Hall. As we learned earlier, Christine would occasionally stop to have a smoke with a group of hospital employees near the emergency room entrance.
I remember her telling me one day, she said, this oddball old man she said, he's really obnoxious, she says. And she says, and I hate that she always like kind of would pre-preface with saying, I hate to be so negative about this, instead of just coming right out, he's really very derogatory to the other people that I'm having a cigarette with. And he makes all of us kind of feel ill at ease, like we don't know what to say to him instead of being outright mean. Like how to, they didn't know how to tolerate him because he was so much older than them. He was 42 at the time, and Chris was 18. And I'm assuming the people she was smoking with were probably in their early 20s, perhaps. He's there all the time. And she says, every time we have our morning cigarette break, he's always there. And she says, the weirdest part, Linda, she'd always say, is that he's always condemning us for smoking, telling us it's not a healthy habit and it stinks and so forth. And she says it's kind of peculiar. And she said, and he brags all the time, and he's always so negative about the other staff members and doctors by name. And Chris was not comfortable with this. She wasn't the type to stand in a group and say, I know so-and-so, and this is my opinion, of that person. She was kinder than that. She would keep it to herself. But she said, he's just kind of obnoxious. And she says, I don't know how to get rid of him. Well, I told her right out. I said, just tell him to F off. I said, just tell him if he doesn't like smoking and he, has nothing positive to say, move on. But that was me. And she would laugh and laugh, and she'd go, yeah, that's fine. That solved the whole problem. And then every day I would hear a little more about him. Memorial Library had a reading room on the first floor, a large room with real long tables. It was a huge room. And she would study there because it was on the bottom of the hill, only about a block and a half from her dorm. She said, she says, I could be wrong, she said, but, and how she'd always preface it. She said, I think he's kind of there all the time. Like, she says, he's like a few rows away from me, and he always seems to be facing me. One time she was going outside for a smoke break, and she really got irked because she said, I knew when I went out, he was following me out, because as soon as I got up, he got up, and it was a huge room. On the side entrance, when you walk down the steps, there used to be two big cement, like embankments on both sides where you could sit. She would sit there and have her cigarette always, because you always had to take a smoke break. And she said, and he came up to me and he asked me out. And I said, oh, like you must be kidding. And she says, and I told him no, that, I really wasn't into dating, and I was kind of a serious student and kind of a loner. She said, I told him, and she says, I thought it was kind of clear. And he asked if she had a boyfriend, and she says, no. Every day it seemed like off and on, every few days perhaps, he would follow her out for a smoke break. Well, finally she decided that isn't working at all, because she would ignore him like she couldn't talk, and she'd put out her cigarette and go back in. Well, anyways, he followed her to the bathroom one day on the first floor, and he waited outside the woman's restroom. Then I was really upset. She said I was angry because she said I felt like he was, in those days we'd say stuff like shadowing, because the word stalking wasn't even in our vocabulary. I don't know that the word even existed. And she said he was waiting outside of the restroom. She says, can you imagine that? A man standing right outside of the woman's restroom waiting? It's not like his girlfriend went in for a second. And she said, and he just doesn't seem to get it. She says, I tell him I don't want to go out. Thank you, but no, I'm not interested. And she said that I'm just kind of here to study. And he stopped coming for a while to the reading room. So she thought, it's all over. And then she told me one night when she called, she said that I think he followed me that from the outside of my Memorial Union, which was across the street, she says, to my dorm. And I said, what made you think that? And she says, because I stopped to talk for a minute with somebody on the way to the dorm. So when I turned around, I saw him there. She says, it just was kind of peculiar. She would tell me these things more and more. He just was like a presence in her life.
10 days into the investigation of Christine's murder, UWPD's task force were chasing several leads, but somehow the case was already feeling cold. And elsewhere, another homicide took place that would once again shock the nation. Robert Kennedy was gunned down while campaigning for the presidency.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Is that possible? It could. Is it possible, ladies and gentlemen? It is possible. He has. Not only Senator Kennedy. Oh, my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot. And another man, a Kennedy campaign manager, and possibly shot in the head. I am right here. Rafer Johnson has a hold of a man who apparently has fired the shot. That's it, Rafer. Get it. Get the gun, Rafer. Okay, now hold on to the guy. Hold on to him. Hold on to him, ladies and gentlemen. Hold him. Hold him. We don't want another Oswald. Hold him, Rafer. We don't want another Oswald. Hold him, Rafer. Keep people away from him.
The body of Senator Robert Kennedy is now in the air in a jet furnished by the White House and the Air Force, heading for New York from Los Angeles. It left there a little bit before 4:30 New York time this afternoon. It will land at LaGuardia Airport in New York. The body will be brought to St. Patrick's Cathedral, arriving sometime around 9:30 New York time tonight. Tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., and longer if there are lines there, it will lie in state before a Requiem Mass at 10 a.m. Saturday, then to go by train from New York to Washington, and in a motor procession from New York's Union Station to go by the Senate Office Building and by the Justice Department, where Robert Kennedy served as Attorney General, before burial at about 5:30 Saturday afternoon in the same plot where President John Kennedy lies.
She's got the look.
Go lightly.
The radiant look.
Go lightly.
The natural look.
Go lightly.
The look you want. A look like this doesn't just happen, but you can create it with Go Lightly. Go Lightly, an entirely new kind of milk from Meadow Gold, to make you look as good as you'll feel. Go Lightly is only 1% fat, but it has 20% more protein.
One night when I called her, she answered the phone kind of rudely. It wasn't that she said anything, it's that she didn't say anything. And I remember saying something like, "Are you there?" Oh, she says, "Oh, it's you." She said, "I'm sorry." She says, "I just got some disturbing phone calls." And she says, and I just hung up, and I thought maybe it was another one. And then she told me about these hang-ups that had been starting. And then as another week or so progressed, he was saying something to her, and I have never been told by her I was never told by her at that point if it was dirty or sexually oriented or provocative or whatever. She would not repeat it. But she says he's got a dirty mind. That was about the extent of what she would say about it. And it got really bad because one night when she called, she said to me, I'm not going to open my window anymore. And it was kind of warm. It was kind of muggy. And she didn't have air conditioning, and neither did I. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "I think it was him standing a few feet from my bushes." And I said, "When?" And she said, "Last night." She said she says, "I was going to pull the shade down," because she was on the left-hand side of the building on the first floor. Right off of the lobby, you would go to the left, and there would be rooms there, single rooms. And she says, and there was a bush right by her window. And she says, "I'm sure it was him." And she says, "What would he be doing standing over there? There's nothing there to really stand for, you know." And she says, "So I'm going to keep my blinds closed." She went from like mild aggravation, where he was starting to complain initially about the smokers and about other staff members, to kind of concern like, this isn't a good person. You know, it's not good to be even in his company. And the fact that he's kind of following me, to the point of she developed fear. And that's how it was progressing. And I don't know at what point she actually developed a fear. But I think it's when that happened, which had to be close to when the semester ended, that she stopped on Bascom, at the top of Bascom there, and talked to Officers Golem and Frey.
That's right. According to Linda and her book, Christine did report this harassment to law enforcement. Linda says that Christine called her one evening and said she'd stopped 2 officers at the top of Bascom Hill and reported Jorgensen by name. She told them everything, his shadowing, hang-up calls, possibly standing outside of her dorm room window. According to Linda, the police officers told her to buy a whistle. Linda would not learn the names of those 2 officers for another 40 years. Once Linda realized that she had somehow completely blanked on the old oddball surgeon at the hospital named Niels Jorgensen, who had shown more than just a little interest in Christine, she was plagued with guilt and decided to right her wrong. She picked up the phone and called the University of Wisconsin-Madison Police Department.
I called on a Sunday night, and I remember so well that some officer picked up the phone, and I said, I'm calling about my girlfriend Christine, who was murdered on May 26th. And I said, I'd like to speak with somebody who's working on the case. I mean, I didn't even think in terms of the word detective in those days. And he said, yeah, no problem. He says, I'll give him the message. And he hung up. And he no sooner hung up, and I thought, you don't even know my name. You don't have a callback number. You have nothing. And I was angry, but I was 18 years old, you know. And so I had a friend who was a nun, and she and I were in the same class together on campus. And I had mentioned one time about Chris, and she knew who Chris was by, in the newspaper. That was it. She hadn't been on campus at that point. Anyways, and I said, what should I be doing? And she said, you need to make contact with the police again, Linda. She said, you need to talk to them.
And so Linda made another attempt in a manner she felt comfortable with at the age of 18.
We had inter-office or inter-campus mail, those envelopes where it says, they're brown and they got kind of holes, and it says to, from, and you cross it out, and then you put your name and to and from on the next line, and that envelope is probably used 100 times because there's 100 different slots on it. Anyway, so I sent a message to the police department through the inter-campus mail, and I remember I rewrote it a few times, and I had all my information as far as my name, address, and phone number and everything, where I lived on campus. And I said, my friend was murdered, and I said, and I think I have information that I need to talk to you about because I had a conversation with an officer and it wasn't really accurate on my part. I said, could you please call me?
Linda never heard back from UWPD.
So at that point, I gave up on the system. And of course, I wasn't in it. If it were now, I would have been knocking on the door and saying, I want to speak to, whoever's chief now or who's ever sergeant in command, whatever. I was a totally different, I had a different makeup at that time. I was brought up that priests and teachers and firemen and cops were all to be respected, and whatever they said goes, And so you didn't question things, but I knew something was wrong, and I was more determined than ever that I'm done talking to people because they're not listening, and I'm just going to have to work this through myself and figure out what needs to be done and how. I think this was a natural way for me to deal with the problem. I had to find a solution for it, but I couldn't depend. I couldn't depend outside of myself for the answers at that point. So it seemed normal to me. It seemed very normal. I thought everybody did this. I mean, in my mind, it was like that's what everybody would do. And that led me on my life chase.
The investigation into Christine's murder seemed to be an uphill battle from day one. 2 days into it, Wisconsin newspapers told concerned readers that the task force was seeking assistance from the public. They needed witnesses and clues. They needed a murder weapon and a motive. They needed help. One of the early trails they pursued was a rash of recent attacks and muggings on and around the UW campus. 3 days after the murder, the mayor of Madison had a meeting with his Citizens Advisory Committee to discuss the recent street violence. For example, on Saturday evening, the night before Christine's murder, a couple had been accosted along University Avenue. On Sunday night, a 22-year-old man was dragged from his car and beaten. Apparently, a lot of these recent crimes involved local teenagers attacking UW college students. Kevin Damask, author of the book Cold, The Unsolved Murders of 7 Young Women, had this to say.
At that time, there was some resentment towards college students because of the protests to the Vietnam War, and you had especially the male population of students that were able to go on to college and not have to go to the war and fight in Vietnam. So there was definitely some animosity towards the students at Madison too, and so I think that kind of fueled this sort of pent-up rage to the people that were outside of the university.
Jane Maydell, who took part in the Dow Day protests in October of '67, recalls firsthand the sense of growing resentment in Madison towards students.
A lot of the locals objected to the anti-war activities. They were unhappy with us. They lived there all their lives. Their mothers and fathers had lived there, and here were these young hippies from New York and Pennsylvania who had a different viewpoint. And there were people who didn't approve of what we were doing, but it didn't stop us. We really felt like we were doing what we needed to do.
To alleviate the growing fear, some steps were taken to tighten up security on campus. A new substation was set up, as well as night patrols of officers on foot. Also, 4 emergency phone boxes were installed on the campus. All of this was implemented by September, when thousands of students would flood back to the campus for the fall term of 1968. One of those students was Linda Schulkel.
So what happened is, the start of my sophomore year, I kind of had the summer to think about it, and I knew I had a course of action. Every free minute I had, and I kind of even had like an agenda in my little notebook. I would do things like one week it would be I would go to the law school and I would contact the professors there and say, is there any way that your law students could study Chris's case as part of their curriculum, that kind of thing. And other times it was like I would dedicate myself to going to see all of her teachers or all of the TAs that she had courses with. And, or another week it would be talking to students from Ann Emory, locating them that had been there the freshman year. You know, I had an agenda all the time, and I worked through each step until it was as exhausted as it could be, and then I'd move on to the next.
And remember Rennebaum's drugstore, or Rennie's, where Christine sat each morning drinking coffee and smoking her cigarettes? Linda went and talked to the staff there too. She also went to various stores along State Street, where she knew Christine used to shop.
I had my whole year lined up, and I did it, and I did it religiously. And I was finding that people, like at Rennebaum's, for example, a lot of people, that worked the staff in those places because she was there so often, remembered her or whatever. But it was like very superficial recollections because she was a very private person. So they saw her, they knew she was there, they could describe her, some didn't. But it was always like nothing personal. It's like, not like, oh yeah, I met her when she was in the shop and we had a long conversation. It wasn't just the kind of thing Chris would do, and it wasn't the kind of thing I expected, but I wanted to see who knew something. And I always asked the question at the time, I said, was anybody ever there with her? Or was anybody ever following her?
While Linda was running her own private investigation and handling all her schoolwork at the same time, by October of 1968, the oddball old man that Christine said had been pestering her was finally on the police radar. As it turns out, Linda was not the only person to bring Niels Jorgensen to the attention of the police. On September 17th, a huge headline was slapped across the front page of the Capital Times newspaper. It read, "Ex-UW surgeon sought for quiz in co-ed slang." This is what the article stated. Dane County Sheriff officers and Madison police have turned up what authorities call their hottest tip yet in the Christine Rothschild murder case which occurred on the University of Wisconsin campus last May 26th. Sought for questioning is a former surgeon who was dismissed from the University Hospital on July 1st. 3 officers from Madison were dispatched there Monday morning. Sheriff Franz Haas disclosed this morning that he had been in touch with the trio this morning, but they had been unable to locate the physician. Haas advised the trio to continue the search to New York if necessary in order to question the man. There are no suspects in this case right now, Hansen said. It's just routine. This man is just one out of 1,000, and he may have a perfectly logical excuse. We simply want to know his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Hansen confirmed that a meeting took place last week concerning this possible lead. Of the man, Hansen stressed, "We hope this is a lead that will develop into a break." The surgeon is described as 43 years old, a native of California, and single. During World War II, he was a machine gunner with the Army in the European campaign. Attention was directed to him because of his eccentric behavior and because of his activities on the night and the morning of the murder. On the morning of the murder, the surgeon is known to have dated 2 girls. He drove the second one home to a hall on Langdon Street, and they reached the address at 4 a.m. That has been verified by a sign-in card. The time is the same as that when Miss Rothschild was seen by a house mother at Ann Emery Hall, where the co-ed was last observed alive. The doctor was scheduled to be on call for surgery at University Hospital on the morning of the murder, but did not show up, an unusual practice, it was said. Later, the man expressed interest in the murder. The Capital Times, through telephone calls to Detroit, learned this noon that the man had checked out of a hotel there and had left a forwarding address in Brooklyn, New York. Before coming to Madison, he was interned at several hospitals throughout the country. He also served as a missionary intern in Africa for several years. He came to the University Hospital in Madison in April of this year for a 3-month trial period. He was dismissed at the end of the trial. 3 days later, a second article was published, this too in the Capital Times. The headline read, "Doctor to be quizzed anew in death probe." Officers from Madison today plan to question further a former University of Wisconsin resident surgeon in New York City in connection with the slaying of Christine Rothschild, May 26th. The doctor was interrogated for 4 hours Thursday morning at the Brooklyn police station and then released. No warrant has been issued. According to University of Wisconsin Police Chief Ralph Hansen, the doctor explained his whereabouts on the day that the stabbed body of the co-ed from Chicago was found in front of Sterling Hall on the UW campus. Preliminary investigation had placed the physician in the neighborhood at the time that Miss Rothschild, who roomed at Ann Emery Hall, was last seen alive. After this second news article in September of 1968, there were no additional news reports about the task force interviewing Jorgensen. As time went on, Linda became frustrated with her lack of success in getting information from people. But she didn't do what a lot of people might do. She didn't blame the people she was speaking with for potentially clamming up on her. Instead, she reevaluated how she was going about it all.
I'd be doing my interpretation of like an interrogation. Well, I think this bothers people. I was young, I was inexperienced, and I was direct. I've always been abrasive, that I know. So I think it rubbed people very wrong, and I think it scared them, and especially when you're talking to somebody about a homicide. But I'd say I knew her, and I'm just trying to see if there's anything that maybe people should know or her family should know. I'd lie, just make up whoever. And I never got any kind of good feedback. And I got very frustrated at the end of my sophomore year, and I knew that was probably me that was the problem. I think I felt disgusted with myself for not being able to draw out of people what they did know.
And so Linda realized she needed to change tactics.
It took me a long time to work that through, how to get around that. And then I stopped being so direct about it, And then I started asking things like, oh, I remember when this girl on campus last year died. I'd say it that way. I tried all different, ways, but I still wasn't getting anything. So at the end, I began to feel that people would not share about her and really didn't know her.
This concludes part 1 of the Thanksgiving Day binge of season 10. When you're ready to continue with the story, hit play on part 2 for another 1 hour and 45 minutes of Dakota Spotlight storytelling.